Today, my special guest is David Amerland, and we're going to be discussing his new book, The Sniper Mind: Eliminate Fear, Deal with Uncertainty, and Make Better Decisions. And that's published by our good friends over at St. Martin's Press. David, thanks for joining us on today's show.
Shaun, I'm delighted to be here.
Well, this is your first time on the show, David, so I know you're going to be new to many of my listeners. So first off, I'd like you to share a bit of what we might call the David Amerland origin story. What are a few of the interesting things that we're going to need to know about you before we hear about the book?
Right. Okay. This is the part where I say, I was born, someday I'm going to die, and now I'm busy trying to find out why the first thing happened before the second one does. But really, like any kind of writer, my evolution has been fairly part of the market change and everything happens with it. I was a business journalist before that. I worked in newspapers as a technological editor. Then I went into business journalism for a big corporation in the UK. And from that, I then sort of jumped into books. And throughout that, the common thread always has been technology, because that affects our lives. That changes so many things. And how we apply technology to what we do every day is full of opportunities, obviously, but also a lot of challenges. And I've always been very good at explaining the plain part of it, the plain English, if you like.
Well, that gives us a good context, a good place to start from. So thank you for that. Now, you do some consulting. You work with different companies and brands around the world. So give us a little context for maybe the types of training and speaking you do, and how does that relate to some of the areas you've written in?
Okay, that's a good question, actually, because every time I go to a company, they have different needs. Different companies have different needs. So some have to do with search, some have to do with social media marketing, some have to do with communications, whether it's external or internal, and how they shape particular messages. Some are data mining and how they basically integrate all that into what they do. And there's a uniting thread to all this, because it's impossible for somebody to know all of this better than the people who actually use it. So they use me as an outside mirror, if you like. And they look at their processes, they look at what they do. They use my services to acknowledge some of their weaknesses and how they can fix them, and also see opportunities. But the uniting thread is a human connection, because it is us as people who drive everything. It is our ideas, our passion, our weaknesses, the way we interact or the way we fail to interact. And once we realize this, then we begin to fix it. And technology these days is basically the interface through which all this human frailty and human strengths and dreams and power and passion actually flow through.
Well, and you've kind of already answered my next question, but I'm going to go there anyways because I want to see where you take us. One of the thoughts I had is I was preparing for the interview and looking over the range of different types of books you've published. So, in my mind, I saw The Sniper Mind and I saw The Tribe That Discovered Trust. And I was like, that seems kind of like a shift or maybe a slightly different course from the books that were before that. And I think you kind of already alluded to where I think you would go with this answer. But would just be curious to hear about, from your perspective as an author, what was it that maybe caused you to shift from what previously sounded like more technical and marketing kind of focused or kind of hands-on books to more, I guess I would think of it as you went from some more micro topics to more macro topics. And so is it reaching a different audience or?
That's a very good way of describing it. And although I suppose it broadens the audience a little bit, essentially what it does is it applies a layer of connectivity to all the topics that actually makes them work. And to begin with, I was writing about search, which sounds technical. It can be, but I was popularizing it and explaining some of its more accessible steps. And then I talked about marketing and branding and social media marketing. And then we talked about trust. And when you think about it, essentially without trust and how we actually establish it, nothing can take place. There can be no transactional sort of interaction. And in the digital medium, this is new for us because we have been used to sort of real-world connections where trust is something which is implicitly understood. We don't have to analyze it. It's either there or it isn't. But in the digital domain, we actually have to be conscious of it, how we may break it inadvertently. If we break it, how we fix it, how we generate it, because we all want to connect. And the medium isn't an easy one, at least initially, in actually helping us achieve that. And from there, going into the sniper mind, which is essentially about brain management techniques and decision making and managing your emotions and controlling yourself better and understanding your motivation, all those things. This is a deeper look at many of the things which essentially make us who we are, and then ask the question, how can we become better? How can we become a better version of who we are? So there's a connective thread throughout all these.
Well, next let's get into the story behind the sniper mind. I'd be curious to hear if there was some sort of a catalyst or an aha moment that kind of pushed you in the direction of writing this book. And a little bit more context for that question in my mind, were you looking to maybe thinking of problems or challenges you personally were facing, or was this more the kinds of things you see the people that you're working with encountering? Or
well,
both?
It's the latter primarily, and this is what happened. Almost 4 years ago, I was writing an article for Forbes for businesses, and we're looking at the decision-making process. And at the time, there was a groundbreaking fMRI research that looked at how snipers think critically the moment they are about to undertake a shot. And it was amazing, because you could see the brain basically synthesizing all these things under tremendous pressure and managing to reach a very credible decision. And just to contextualize this a little bit, whatever people may think about snipers and what they do is wrong, because essentially they're the most overwatched individuals in any kind of battlefield. Every shot they take has to be accounted for. The legality of every shot they take has to be fully worked out and scrutinized back home. So as far as combatants go, these are the people who basically can go to jail when they return because they made the wrong decision. Nobody else faces that kind of pressure. So and this is, devoid of, before we even get into any kind of other pressure they face on the battlefield itself, where they're fatigued and tired and exhausted and hurt and injured and bullets are flying about, and they are fully aware of their responsibility to other people they are overwatching and protecting, who themselves may be under fire. So if you synthesize all that, it's a very complex, very fluid situation with incredible pressure. And they have to make a critical decision in microseconds, and they do it. And you think, well, how is that possible? How do their brains think? And that's what started. And, the article itself was very brief, and it sort of gave you, in about 1,000 words, 4 things you can do to basically emulate a little bit of a thinking, that kind of thinking. And the moment it went up on Forbes, it got like 600,000 views. So we thought, oh, yeah, wait a minute, this is really cool. A lot of feedback came on that. And then as it happens, one of my editors said, hey, maybe there's a book here. And I thought, well, it's only one research paper I looked at, so there's no way there's a book there. So I thought, let's go back and look. And I looked at all the research, and there's a lot more research and a little bit more research after that. And I thought, hey, this is really, really cool. So 3 years later, after a lot of sleepless nights, much research digging, and after talking to 100 snipers, active and retired, the book came about. So that was the journey.
That's a fun journey. I'm sure it was a very intriguing and eye-opening process to talk to that many snipers. I listened to the audiobook, and just it was fun to hear you talking about just some of the communications challenges you face, just trying to get people to share, because this is kind of secret insider information. Another thing
is, and I've got a funny story about that, because initially I knew I had to talk to snipers, right? And how do you actually? It's not like you can advertise on Craigslist for snipers to talk to you without getting a call from law enforcement, right? So, I first went on Imgur, and I put up a poster saying, "If you're a sniper, I've got a job for you." And that wording may have been a little bit not well thought through. So then I had to sort of go back and think about this. And then I talked to a few buddies who are in the communication business and a few business people, and they knew people in the army, and that was my in, basically. So after that, it's sort of, but the initial thing was quite daunting.
Oh, that's a fun story. Thank you for sharing that. So in preparation for our talk today, I was taking a look at some of the reviews on Amazon, and the one title that really stuck out to me, and this is, I got to give a shout out to G. Rosenblatt. Thank you for your 5-star review. But the title of that review was "A Book About Knowing Oneself, Wrapped in a Business Book, Wrapped in a Book About Snipers." I thought, hey, that really seemed like a pretty decent description. But what kind of for this part of our conversation, I wanted you to start us off and talk about the level of distraction and noise that people are facing right now in modern society. You already alluded to the fact that snipers have to make decisions under very difficult conditions, and there can be a lot of things vying for their attention. But what about whether it's somebody who's in business or just the average person out in the workplace today, or somebody who works even at home? What about the range of just utter and complete distraction that we're facing, and what are some of the negative effects that's having on us that would kind of even predispose us from making positive changes or moving forward?
What a fantastic question, and it comes up frequently when I talk about the book. And you're right, the moment you mention snipers and what they do, they work in an incredibly noisy, full of distractions environment, and yet they manage to perform at an exceptionally high level. You say, how can they do it? And the answer is simple, right? They focus. You say, oh, that's it, right? Focus. How do I do that? And that's where it gets interesting, because in order to focus, really, you need to understand what's of real value to you. And you can't understand what's of real value to you if you don't understand who you are, fundamentally, really. And if we think about identity and who we are, we may think who we are, but it is not who we are. It is what other people expect us to be, what our friends and family want us to be, what our children and pets, perhaps looking up to us, want us to be, and think we are. And it's not that. Who we are fundamentally is something which we need to work really hard at in order to understand our core values. And the moment we do that, then we suddenly have all the inner strength to focus on what's really important, because we understand it's important to us and we want to work hard to achieve it. And that's how we learn to focus. And simple as I have made it sound now, it's not, because it's very introspective. We need to peel back all the layers of ourselves and say, this thing which I did the other day, that's total affectation. I don't even know why I did that. And that other thing which I did, that's, that total rubbish. I shouldn't have done that. And the thing I said the other day, that wasn't really me. I was just trying to be somebody else. And then, the deeper you get into, you realize there's a lot of things you can get rid of. And then you say, okay, who am I really? And the moment you begin to understand that, things become, a lot of the noise disappears, a lot of distractions don't matter anymore. And that's when you find your focus. That's when you find your purpose in many ways. And that is a frightening power. And the brilliant thing about this is we can all do it.
So getting in touch with kind of that core identity, it's exciting and scary, but very powerful as we move in that direction. This is kind of a loaded question, and I know you can't answer a full scope of this in the time frame we have here today, but give us a window into some of the special training that snipers or other special forces types of soldiers go through that prepares them to perform under seemingly impossible and crazy odds. Maybe pick one or two stories that you share in the book to kind of give us a win for the listener who just has absolutely no clue of what that kind of a soldier goes through. What are some of the things that go into their training?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, because it's challenging, and let's see if I can actually manage to give you a very complete answer. Now, whatever you look at, whether you look at the way Spartans trained 2,500 years ago, the way ancient samurai warriors trained, the way any kind of elite fighting force trained, and whether you look at special ops today, Delta Force or Navy SEALs or any kind of sniper training school, they all have the same thing. Basically, they have a physical component, and it's not to get you fit, probably fit already when you get there. It's not even to get you fitter. It's basically designed to physically break you. They have a mental component where they want you to be able to focus mentally when you're physically broken. Incredibly difficult. And for this, I'll give you an example. In sniper training, they give you, you're sleepless, so you're basically spent 48 hours on 4 hours sleep. You have just run a 6 miles, carrying 35 pounds, and you're wet, tired, and hungry. You get to headquarters and they say, hey, that sign you passed, 10 kilometers back? What did he say exactly, and where did he point to? And you have to be able to hold it in your head. And all this, the run takes place in the dark. just to make matters more interesting. So that's the mental component. Then there's the psychological component. At which point do you say enough is enough, and why? And this comes back down to why. Why do you want to be that person? Why do you want to do those things? It's finding yourself. Because really, at no point enough is enough. You can't say, well, I'm giving up now. Because eventually, you're going to be on a mission, people will rely on you, and you're going to say, hey, guys, I'm going home. This is really too cold, too dangerous, too scary. I'm going back to the movie theater, which I had before I came here. Those things, which are comfort zones. And then there's the component which basically synthesizes all those things, which is the person you want to be, the person you aspire to become. So any kind of training has those components, and they all aim to do the same thing. They peel back the layers of your identity. They peel back your reasons for doing whatever until all that remains is a very solid core. And from that core, you can actually build on very real values. And that's why here, elite soldiers from anywhere in the world, and they all talk about the special bond they have with each other. And you think, this is kind of army buddy story, right? And it isn't. They're people who have gone through a very rigorous process where they've built up their identity through their willpower, if you like, and they have all done it, and they rely on each other utterly. It's a kind of deep sense of trust. And it overcomes any differences. They're not all the same. They're all very different. But they are willing to overcome that and actually trust each other with their lives. And that changes the perspective of connection with another human being at a very fundamental level. So that's what they go through. This is why sometimes we don't get them, because really they don't speak our language. They speak a different type of language.
One of the non-military examples that you share in the book, and I was glad that this is in the book because it's just based on the fact that there was a major motion picture created around this story, but it's something that a wide range of folks are going to be familiar with. So you relate the story of retired airline captain Chelsea Sullenberger, or Sully as people often know him, and U.S. Airways Flight 1549. Would love to have you just explore some of the ground you cover in the book about how, Sully and his co-pilot, they were able to, use what would be sniper-like training, so to speak, to achieve the impossible. So I think that might be another good counterexample in a non-military context. So tell us about that.
Okay, that's an excellent example to use, because essentially in that particular context, he had 208 seconds, a very narrow window, to do something he had never really trained for before. And if you think about it, snipers, for all the training they get, have never really trained for the mission they actually solve each time. It's always unique, it's always new. Yes, they train, they prepare, they build up skills, and they build up a way of thinking, they build up a way of approaching things. But ultimately, on the day when they make a critical decision, it is always brand new. And Captain Sully's is no exception. And the question here is, which is of intense interest to us, how did he do it? Because case in point, he was not a sniper, he's not an extreme combatant in any sense of the word, but the training he had, the mental skill set he used prior to that, the way he went about shaping his mental life and his psychological aspect is very similar to the way that snipers visualize about things. They go through missions and the sort of scenarios they run in their heads, and that creates neural habits, if you like, which allows the brain to work in a particular way. So centers themselves work a bit more smoothly than somebody who hasn't done it. And that's what enables critical decision making under pressure to actually happen in a very fluid environment. And this is a classic demonstration of it. And again, it's something which is learned. We consider him exceptional because he did it, and nobody else could quite do the same thing afterwards when they try the simulations. But he's exceptional only in that he prepared himself to do it. And that's, again, a lesson we need to take on board. We live in a 21st century world where pretty much everything we face right now is fluid, it's new, it has complexity in it, it has ambiguity, we're never sure if we're doing the right thing. We need to have the ability to navigate that with a certain degree of confidence. And the only way we do it is if our core, our anchor, our sense of self, values, confidence in our approach is solid, and then we can apply that at the moment when it's required.
Well, as we move towards wrapping up, I wanted to see if we could, for the sake of our listeners, help a variety of folks that are doing different things, different stations in life, see how this book might be for them, or how what you share in the book is going to relate exactly to what they're doing. So the first one that came to mind was, say, the business executive or somebody who's in leadership. What's one thing from the book that person could start applying today that might help them to be more effective or be more self-aware?
Well, anybody in leadership right now operates in the same world the military works in, and that's a world which they use an acronym for, which is called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the way anybody in charge learns to synthesize all these things is by being observant. And I know it seems very simple. You think, well, if I'm observant, but actually it's not. A lot of the things which we do in our daily lives at any type of level of existence are on autopilot, and our brain fills in the details. And if we are asked to recall, what did you have for breakfast today? 50% of the people can't remember. They can't even remember what they did yesterday, the whole day. It's just they did something, and the day was Monday, right? So learning to be observant changes the patterns in our brains. It changes the way we process information. It changes the way that we actually take on board details. We notice more things. We analyze things better. We synthesize scenarios better. From a leadership point of view, this is a critical skill. And it starts with very simple things, by observing pretty much everything which you do in everyday life and understanding its impact and how it actually links to everything else. And if anybody in a leadership position did that on a daily basis, I can guarantee that the decision making will change in a very short time.
Well, this next one is kind of selfish for me because I'm involved in marketing books on a daily basis. But what about the person involved in, say, marketing products or services? After reading your book, I think they're going to have a better understanding of how the mind works. And I guess what I'm specifically thinking of here is, what would happen, say, when we put you talked about this a little in the book, sometimes somebody will have a time limited offer put in front of them. And we see this all over the place with tools like ClickFunnels and other squeeze page centric products. It's an area of marketing that I think anybody who's selling products and services, we all need to be more effective here. So, in some sense, how can they kind of reverse psychology this and use what they're learning to be more effective in marketing to others?
Okay, what I'm going to say here in terms of what they need to do applies pretty much to every kind of role, but marketers in particular. And it's empathy. And here's why. As marketers, we have a job to do. What is it? Whether we sell a service, a product, a brand, or whatever, we need to do it, right? And we think, what is important to us? These are the things which are important to us. How do we get them in front of people? Well, here are the channels. We bludgeon them to death. We overload their attention. We tell them how great we are, and job done, right? And job these days is never done because people are no longer captured by these funnels so easily. They have broken through. They communicate with each other. They use all the technological tools that we have at our disposal to basically have lateral spreading of messages, and they're very hard to pinpoint. Very hard to grab their attention. And if we change that around, if we exercise empathy, if we think not what's important to us, but what is important to them, and we start from that perspective. And then as we come towards us and we see, well, the thing which is important to them, does that overlap with what we're doing? And if not, how can we find commonalities in our approach? And if we approach it like that, it's a win-win scenario because suddenly we are selling a product or a service or brand or whatever it is that people actually will like because it responds to their needs in something that will resonate with what they are feeling, what they're doing. And from a neurological point of view, in order for us to actually feel empathy in our head, we need to mirror, not just think, because thinking is a marketing persona, right? We all know those. But actually feel what is important to other people. And we need to mirror it in the circuits of our brain. And the moment we do that, we become one of them. And if we become one of them, the message is real now. We don't say, well, this is the best thing ever since sliced bread, because there has always been something marketed since sliced bread. It's the best thing ever. Well, they can't all be true. So this is what needs to be done, really.
And then finally, for that person listening who says, well, I'm not a business leader, I'm not a marketer, but hey, I'm a person who wants to make some positive changes, maybe create new habits that are going to stick. What's the takeaway for that reader?
Well, we all make decisions every day. And whether we realize or not, some of them are critical, and we don't realize why we made them until a long time afterwards, and we regret them. You know what they say, make decisions in haste, repent at leisure, right? So that's what pretty much happens. So in order for us to understand, to become better at who we are, to become better versions of ourselves in our lives, as well as in our work and business and everything else, we need to have a better understanding of who we are. And essentially the book helps us shape that question. Who are we? It gives us some techniques on peeling back the layers of identity, on discovering really the person underneath, the person who has the values and the motivation that drives everything else. So even if you're not in business and you're interested in becoming better, well, this will actually help you.
Now, every book writing journey, it's a transformational experience where an author is kind of forced to wrestle with and live out a message in a new way. And this like it seems to amp up once the book is out there and available to the public. I'd be curious to hear, what did this look like for you with preparing for and writing The Sniper Mind? You know, how were you changed, or what did you learn about yourself in the process? I would imagine putting this kind of a book together, you learned an awful lot about yourself along the way.
You do, and you learn a lot of things about a lot of other things as well. So the first thing I learned was that I, like many people around me, I had a whole lot of preconceptions or misconceptions about the military mindset and what snipers do. So these two went away really quickly. And then I began to also understand, and I wrestled with this a little bit, or a lot, that a lot of the decisions that I used to make were not really my own. They were decisions which inadvertently or directly are forced upon me by the environment and the expectations of others and everything else. And the moment we realize that, we begin to realize that we have relatively little control in our lives unless we stop, look, and then think. So I had to sort of take a few steps back and begin to examine critically my own decision-making process. And as my respect for snipers and military personnel of all description rose sky high, then I began to actually apply some of the things which they did to what I was doing, because I was operating for about 3 months on 4 hours sleep a day, and it became really, really difficult. So much to the point I was doubting I could ever finish this book. So I applied that, and then you have to find your own level of self-confidence. It does change you. It becomes a journey of transformation, as you said. You know, I started thinking, okay, this is really important to me, and that's really important to me, and this is how I'm going to focus, and this is how I'm going to ignore the 50 emails which have urgent on the subject line. And that's what I did.
Oh, well, and I can say, after, you know, I did a quick fly through the book via audio in preparation for our talk today, and I'm actually getting on a flight tomorrow. I'm like, all right, now I'm going to listen to it at a slower pace and really try to take it in. But I think this really seems like the sort of book that, honestly, somebody could come back to this book once a year just for a refresher and a reminder, because, you know, these are the sorts of principles. If you can live this out and keep learning and being transformed, it will really change your life for the better. So
it will. And I will just say that if anybody reading the book and taking away things they can apply, then think of how you can basically spread those principles to those around you, because ultimately, without a support network of some kind, if other people around you are not helping you maintain that standard, if you're not helping them raise their standards, and then they help you maintain and keep on raising your standard, we're all going to fail. Alone, nobody can operate at a very high level for very long.
Well, and I always find one of the best ways for me to learn something and really get it down is to share it with others. And so, you know, not only will you be helping somebody, you'll also build in a level of accountability to help yourself move forward. David,
that's true.
David, if people want to connect with you online, and if they want to get their own copy of The Sniper Mind, where are some of the places they can find you, and where are some of the places they can find the book?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at David Amerland, or you can find me on my website at davidamerland.com, or on Google Plus, and just Google me. You'll find me in many different places. And usually I'm pretty good at responding, because I do take this seriously. The connection is magic, and the magic never wears off. You can find the book on pretty much any bookshop. You can find it on Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk or .ca or anywhere near you. And I think you can get it directly from the publishers as well, St. Martin's Press.
Well, and as I do with every interview, I'll be sure to include links in the show notes, places where you can connect with David, and all the places you can pick up the copy of the book. And you and I actually connected on Twitter, so that's part of our journey together. I did a tweet related to the audiobook, and that's what got us moving down the path of doing an interview. And just, for those of you listening who are already fellow podcasters or aspiring podcasters, and you want to know, how do I connect with authors? In all the places I communicate, Twitter is one of the most effective places to reach authors. It's amazing the level of response. So if you're looking for a secret tip, there it is, Twitter. You can find lots of authors. They will often respond to you. So anyways, it's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with David Amerland. Once again, our book today was The Sniper Mind: Eliminate Fear, Deal with Uncertainty, and Make Better Decisions. To connect with David and find out more about the Sniper Mind, be sure to visit his website at davidamerland.com. And David, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It has been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much. That was amazing.